All right, everyone. So let's talk about Lebanon. Lebanon is a country that is really about to explode into a civil war. Now, why do I say this? Because the condition for a civil war is building up. The condition for a civil war is developing. What condition is this? Well, you have a massive paramilitary organization in Lebanon called Hezbollah. And before Israel weakened Hezbollah, Hezbollah was really more powerful than the Lebanese military. And the Israelis are still in South Lebanon. And they are still bombing Lebanon. And the Israelis have said to the Lebanese government that Hezbollah needs to be disarmed. The American government has said that Hezbollah needs to be disarmed. And so Lebanon, which is a very poor country, and Lebanon, which is statistically the most angry country on earth, really wants American investment. It wants America to invest more into the Lebanese economy, and so they are going to act at the behest of the Americans and the Israelis because Lebanon is not in a position to say F you to Israel and America. So Lebanon has to acquiesce. So the Lebanese government has said, okay, Hezbollah, you need to disarm yourselves. And Hezbollah has said, no, we are not going to disarm ourselves. Not as long as Israel is in South Lebanon and not as long as Israel is attacking Lebanon. We are not going to acquiesce. We are not going to comply. And this is the type of condition that leads to a civil war. This is the type of situation that escalates into a civil war because you have a massive paramilitary organization that has a lot of guns. They do not want to disarm. And then you have the official government that is pressuring this paramilitary organization to disarm. And so what happens? If the paramilitary organization refuses to comply, eventually you will have a clash and you will have fighting. And if a civil war breaks out in Lebanon, guess who's going to come in as the hero to bring order in the region? Israel. Israel will come in the name of supporting its ally, the Lebanese government, and Israel will bomb Lebanon even more. It will bomb South Lebanon even more, and then what you will have is a refugee crisis. The Shiites living in South Lebanon will flee into northern Lebanon, and who lives in northern Lebanon? The Maronite Catholics, who tend to be very pro-Israel, and the Maronite Catholics do not want to see a flood of Shiites going into their areas. They don't want to see Shiites in their communities. And so the Maronite Catholics will push the Shiites away, and that could lead to more ethnic tension, and you could have a serious ethnic struggle between the Maronite Catholics and the Shiite South Lebanese. And if violence breaks out between those two demographics, the Israelis will do exactly what they did back in the 1980s. They will back and arm the Maronites to fight and kill the Shiites because those Shiites, well, they tend to be more sympathetic towards Hezbollah, and Israel really doesn't want those people to be in Lebanon because Israel wants to be the dominating power in the Near East, and it really would do better, I mean, in its own warped perspective, it would be to its own benefit if there were at least less Shiites in Lebanon. So the Israelis wouldn't mind backing the Maronites to fight and kill the Shiites. Now, back in the 1980s, there was a massive civil war in Lebanon. I mean, the civil war began before the 1980s, but in the 1980s, Lebanon was in the middle of a very bloody and violent civil war. You had the Maronite Catholics and you had the Palestinians who were under the PLO, and they also had other allied factions as well. And the Israelis backed the Maronite Catholics to fight and kill the Palestinians in Lebanon. And this conflict, this extremely bloody story eventually culminated into what is known as the Sabra and Shatila massacres that took place in 1982. The Israelis armed, backed, they supported this very, very nationalistic, very far-right paramilitary group called the Kataib. They were also known as the Lebanese Phalangists. They are still around in Lebanon. They're in North Lebanon. The Phalangists eventually did a horrific massacre of the Palestinians in 1982. They went into the Palestinian areas of Sabra and Shatila after the PLO had agreed to disarm. Yes, what happened in 1982? You had this civil war that was going on for years, and eventually the PLO said, okay, we will leave Lebanon. They left Lebanon. They followed their agreement. They complied with the agreement. And guess what happened? The Palestinian communities of Sabra and Shatila in Lebanon were left utterly defenseless. They had no weapons, very little weapons. There were some guys that said, no, we're not giving up our guns. They tried to put up a fight, but it was completely futile. But the Palestinian communities were left utterly defenseless. And the Phalangists did not honor their end of the deal, because the Yasser Arafat, who was leading the PLO, said, okay, we're going to leave Lebanon, but I want assurances that the Palestinian civilians will be unharmed. And the Americans told the PLO, oh yes, don't worry, you have our assurances that the Palestinian civilians will be unharmed, blah, blah, blah. And Yasser Arafat got enough assurances from the Americans, and the PLO left Lebanon. And guess what happened? The Phalangists, backed by Israel, butchered the Palestinian population. And thousands were murdered in really a matter of 3 days or so. Raping, killing, pillaging, slaughtering, the whole thing. And this was after the Palestinians were disarmed. There is also another element that we have to factor in here, and that is the Syrian refugee population that is within Lebanon. Lebanon currently has a substantial number of Syrian refugees living within its borders. These Syrians tend to be Shiites because, as we all know, there was a massive civil war in Syria, and that led to a lot of Shiite Syrians going into South Lebanon to live amongst other Shiites because they didn't want to be killed by the NATO-backed Sunni fanatics in Syria. So you have these Alawite Shiite Syrians living in Lebanon. A lot of the non-Shiite Lebanese hate the Syrian refugees. They don't like them. They don't want to see them. Even though they look exactly alike and you can barely tell them apart. You really can't tell them apart, but they know, just like Japanese people can see a Chinese person a million miles away and vice versa. They don't like those Syrian refugees. And so if you have a civil war in Lebanon between the Shiites and the Lebanese government, between the Maronites and the Shiite South Lebanese, that is going to exasperate even more hatred against the Syrian population within Lebanon. And you will have Lebanese nationalists, Maronites and non-Maronites, saying, we need to butcher these Syrians. And you could have anti-Syrian pogroms take place in Lebanon in which hundreds, if not thousands, will be killed. It's going to be very ugly if a civil war breaks out. And Israel right now is still bombing Lebanon. In fact, there was a whole parking lot of excavators that were there to help develop South Lebanon. They were there for the purpose of construction. And Israel just bombed all the excavators. Yeah, they just bombed them, destroyed them. And the South Lebanese said, what are you doing? We need these excavators for construction. And Israel said, nope, we got to bomb them. Boom, destroyed, because they don't want that area to develop. They want to expand further into Lebanon. And they don't want the Shiites to be empowered in South Lebanon. What do the Israelis do? What do the Israelis and the Americans do? They push a term onto Hezbollah that they know very well Hezbollah is not going to be willing to agree with. This is a classic method of finding a pretext for war. This is what, for example, Madeleine Albright did to the Serbs before the bombing of Serbia. They told the Serbs, okay, Serbia, if you want peace, you have to give Kosovo autonomy. And the Serbs said, okay, fine, yeah, we'll sign on to that. You want Kosovo wants autonomy. Here's autonomy. Here you go, Kosovo. Are you happy? And the Americans said, okay, we need our pretext to bomb Serbia and destroy Yugoslavia. What are we going to do? Madeleine Albright said, okay, well, let's just give them a term that we know they're not going to comply with. And what was that term? Okay, Serbia, you have to agree that NATO will have the right to deploy troops anywhere, anytime it wants in Serbia. And they knew damn well that the Serbs would not agree with that, because that would be the Serbs giving up their autonomy to NATO. And the Serbs said, no, you know that we cannot agree with this. You know that we're not going to sign on to such a term. And the Americans said, okay, now we have our excuse to bomb Serbia and destroy whatever was left of Yugoslavia. So the Americans and the Israelis are doing the same damn thing. They want the pretext to destroy Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is a massive proxy for Iran. They want to get rid of any sort of Iranian stronghold in the Middle East, because Israel wants its empire in the region. And the Americans want to make that happen, because if you have an Israeli empire controlling the Middle East, that would be America controlling the Middle East through proxy, through this third party that we call Israel. Israel would have its Davidic kingdom. America would further entrench its power in the region. Both sides are happy. The big Satan, America, is happy, and the little Satan, Israel, is happy, to use the terminology of the Iranian regime, which is, I mean, this is all just humor for me. So they give a term to Hezbollah that they know Hezbollah will not agree with. Okay, Hezbollah, you have to disarm. What? Yeah, you have to disarm. You want us to disarm while Israel is stationed in South Lebanon? Yes. You want us to disarm while Israel destroys and bombs South Lebanon, and even goes so far as to bomb all these excavators which were for the purpose of construction? Yes. Yes, you have to disarm. So you want us to get rid of our autonomy? Yes. Okay, so the leader of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, he comes out recently and he says that Hezbollah would wage a Karbala-style battle against being disarmed if it must. What does he mean by Karbala-style battle? He's referring to the 7th century battle where the Prophet Muhammad's grandson, and this is what the traditional Islamic history says, but the grandson of Muhammad, alongside 70 other warriors, fought against the Umayyad army, which supposedly had an army of 4,000 people. The whole point is, this guy is saying, the leadership of Hezbollah is saying, we're going to fight to maintain our right to be armed. And there was a meeting recently within the Lebanese government in which the Hezbollah officials who were in this government building left the building in protest. They said nope, because the Lebanese army chief entered the room where these Hezbollah guys were, and the Hezbollah guys, just to show their anger against the Lebanese government, left the building. They said, no, we're not going to be in this guy's presence because he is a traitor to Israel. And we are showing that we are not willing to comply. And Hezbollah is thinking, okay, Israel, we really can't trust you. Israel told the PLO to disarm. Well, Israel told the PLO to leave Lebanon, which basically disarmed the Palestinians. And that led to the Palestinians being butchered. And Hezbollah is making an argument saying, if we disarm, that's just going to enable Israel to further get deeper into Lebanon. And we don't want that. We're not going to allow that. So the Lebanese military needs to show that it is the Lebanese military. And when you have two powerful entities that are vying over power, and in this case, it's the Lebanese government that wants to dominate all of Lebanon and not allow any sort of state within a state situation, eventually you have a clash between the official government and the powerful paramilitary entity that wants to maintain its prestige and wants to maintain its strength through arms. It reminds me of what happened in Sudan. So we have an example that really demonstrates how what's happening in Lebanon is a condition for civil war. So Sudan is in the middle of a civil war right now, very bloody, massive humanitarian crisis. People are starving. It's horrific. The Sudanese civil war is between the Sudanese government and the RSF. The RSF is the Rapid Support Forces. They were initially called the Janjaweed, and they were formed when Sudan was under the government of Omar al-Bashir. These guys are murderers, rapists, pillagers, killers. They're scumbags, they're evil, they're demonic. There's nothing good about the RSF. They were doing all of the raping and killing for Omar al-Bashir's regime against people in South Sudan, against Christians. These people are scoundrels, criminals. They're just no damn good. So eventually the Janjaweed became the RSF, and they tried to make themselves look like a legitimate entity, and they're not. They're just a bunch of murderers and rapists. So what happened? The Sudanese military said, okay, RSF, you guys have a lot of guns and you got a lot of money, and they get all of their wealth from the massive amount of gold that they own. They actually control a bunch of gold mines, or at least one giant gold mine in Sudan. So they have a lot of money. The RSF is worth billions, which is surprising because the RSF, when you look at them, they look like a bunch of raggedy low lives. They look like shit, to be honest with you. I don't know. With all that money, they can't really form at least a proper looking military. But anyway, the Sudanese military, the Sudanese government told the RSF, like, okay, you guys have to integrate into the military. You guys can't just be this powerful entity and be this state within a state. We need to have a unified Sudan, and we're not going to have a unified Sudan if we have this massive paramilitary organization which is separate from the military. So you guys need to be absorbed into the official military of Sudan. The RSF refused, and what happened? There was a clash. And there is a clash over who's going to rule over Sudan. Is it going to be the official government, or is it going to be the RSF? And so you have two dogs fighting over the same bone, and that bone is power. As the old African proverb goes, when two elephants are fighting, it is the grass that is crushed. And that is what's happening in Sudan, and that is what happens in every single war. There is another example that I can think of, and that is what happened in Israel. Yes, we're going to go to Israel. This is a part of modern Israeli history that no one ever talks about, and that is the Atalena affair. So the Atalena affair was a mini civil war that broke out in Israel in 1948. No, it was not between Arabs and Jews. It was actually between Jews. And what happened was you had this massive paramilitary organization in Israel called the Irgun. Irgun were a bunch of fanatics. They were murderers. They used to murder Arabs. And they also were a huge part of the military might of Israel at the time. And the Israelis at this time, they were a brand new country, and they wanted to be a country where the military would be unified and there wouldn't be a massive paramilitary organization that would rival the Israeli Defense Forces. So the Israeli government told the Irgun that it needed to be absorbed into the IDF, and the Irgun said, no, we don't want to do that. And so the Irgun brought this big ship to Israel. It was called the Atalena. And in this ship was a bunch of armed Irgun fighters and a lot of guns. And they brought the guns over from France, which is interesting. And so the Atalena ship parked in Israel. It parked at the Israeli coast, and there was a battle. And a bunch of people died. Over a dozen people were killed. It wasn't a war, but it was nonetheless a fight amongst the Jews over... It was over independence for a paramilitary organization. One side saying that this organization should not be independent, and the other side, the Irgun, saying that they wanted to be independent. The IDF won in the end, and the Irgun was forced to be a part of the IDF. And that's what happened. We have really examples that demonstrate how these sorts of situations lead to a civil war. And Hezbollah is being told that it needs to disarm. The American ambassador to Turkey and the U.S. envoy to Syria, Mr. Thomas Barak, is really the mouthpiece for this agenda for the United States, representing the United States, and he has said Hezbollah needs to be disarmed, blah, blah, blah. And he recently insulted the Lebanese. He was in a press conference in Lebanon, and there were all these Lebanese journalists who were trying to ask him questions. And he said, "Everyone in this room needs to calm down. Everything needs to be disorderly. You see, this is the problem with you Lebanese. You guys act animalistic."
And I want to tell you something. The moment that this starts becoming chaotic, like animalistic, we're gone. So you want to know what's happening? Act civilized, act kind, act tolerant, because this is the problem with what's happening in the region.
And I'm thinking, what is this guy talking about? This is how every American press conference looks like. It's a bunch of reporters and journalists saying, "Sir, Mr. Senator, Mr. President, please." That's how every American press conference is. But when the Lebanese journalists do it, it's animalistic behavior. And this really demonstrates, it reflects how the American empire and the Israelis see the Lebanese as just animalistic. That's how they see them. And then you had this lady by the name of Morgan Ortagus, and she said that I want to thank our ally Israel for defeating Hezbollah. And then she said, "We are the people who are going to disarm Hezbollah. We are the people who are going to return Lebanon to being a sovereign, independent state." And that is really the opposite of what they want. They don't want Lebanon to be independent. They will say, well, we don't want Lebanon to have this massive paramilitary organization within its borders because that means Lebanon being under the control of an Iranian proxy, at least partially. What they really want is for Lebanon to be dependent on America and Israel. That's what this is about at the end of the day. This has nothing to do with Lebanese independence, because if it did, the Americans would be telling the Israelis to get the hell out of Lebanon. If they really want a independent Lebanon, they'd be telling the Israelis to leave Lebanon alone and just be allies, be a good trading partner with the Lebanese. But they're not, because they want to control Lebanon, because they want to make sure that Lebanon is not going to be a satellite state in any way for Iran, because Iran is a massive ally to Russia, and Russia is the big nemesis of the American empire. So this is what the Americans have in mind. And so they're giving Hezbollah a term that they know Hezbollah will not be willing to abide by, which is to disarm. If you have a civil war in Lebanon break out, what will happen is Israel will be involved, just like when Lebanon was in the throes of a civil war back in the 1980s. Israel invaded Lebanon. So Israel will enter Lebanon, and Israel will bomb South Lebanon even more in the name of helping its ally, the Lebanese government. And then you will have a massive refugee crisis of Shiite Lebanese moving from the south going into the north. I know this will happen because that's exactly what happened when Israel was fighting Hezbollah recently. You had a massive refugee crisis, and the Shiites from the south went to northern Lebanon, and the Maronite Catholics of northern Lebanon said, well, we don't want your kind here. We don't want you people here. Now, the war did not last long enough for there to be a massive ethnic tension between the Maronites and the South Lebanese. But if you have a prolonged conflict, then the tensions, the demographic tensions between the Maronites and the Shiites will have enough time to develop to the point where it would become very violent. If there is violence between the Maronites and the South Lebanese Shiites, then it would escalate into a much worse situation. The Israelis will back the Maronites to fight and kill the Shiites, just as they backed the Maronites to fight and kill the Palestinians in the 1980s. But it looks like the Americans and the Israelis are really setting up the conditions. They're setting up a perfect storm in which a civil war will break out, because they're telling Hezbollah that they need to do something that they know damn well Hezbollah does not want to do. It's just evil what's happening, and I really hate it. But I saw the news today about Hezbollah being told that they have to disarm, and I saw that, and I immediately thought to myself, oh my God, this is the perfect storm for a civil war. And it just saddens me really to no end. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.